Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I'll just put this down here. Just to be clear, I do have two job titles. One is CEO of the Department of Housing, Local Government, Community Development, but as Dan has just spoken about, the other hat I wear is CEO Housing under the Housing Act in the NT. So there's a lot of the topics Dan was just talking about, very familiar to me and things that we're very focused on. And just to respond to one bit of what Dan said, for me, in this conversation that we'll have today, the conversation we're having the next 2 days, the conversation we're having through the Joint Steering Committee, the policy space is well and truly open. You don't have to wait for the resolution of the class action to have the policy space of remote housing open. That policy space is well and truly open. I spend a decent proportion of my day every day talking to many of the people in this room about those very policy issues. But let me start by acknowledging the Larrakia people as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and to emerging leaders. And let me extend that respect to the many leaders and elders and representatives of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations we have from across the territory and beyond. It's great to have you all here. It's great to be part of this conversation and to have the opportunity to join you on the stage today. In thinking about what I was going to talk to you about today, I kept on coming back to 2 points. And the first one is, this is hard. This is hard work. Working on Aboriginal housing and improving outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians is hard work. There's no single agency, there's no single funding stream, there's no single reform, there's no single measure that's going to address these issues. There's no silver bullet here. The issues, as we've been hearing already this morning and will continue to hear over the next 2 days, are deep-seated and long-standing, and we see them in housing conditions, we see them in overcrowding, we see them in ageing infrastructure, and in the day-to-day experience of Aboriginal Territorians across remote communities, homelands, town camps, and urban areas. So it's hard, we're not going to be able to do it alone. The second point is probably more direct, which is that we, the Department of Housing, Local Government, Community Development, have not been good enough at what we do. And we're working very hard to change that and get better with the partners, many of whom are in this room, to do so. We haven't consistently delivered the outcomes people need, and that needs to be acknowledged. Being honest about where we are falling short is the starting point for getting better, and we know we need to get better. So I spend a lot of my time listening to what communities and stakeholders are saying. I've been spending a lot of time, for obvious reasons, in the last few weeks in Alice Springs and the town camps listening to people. And I hear, when I get out and about across the territory, some consistent themes. I hear that the system can feel slow and hard to navigate. I hear that responses are not always consistent and people get mixed messages. I hear that decisions can be removed from community priorities, and I hear that accountability is not always clear. These are fair observations, and they're reflected in the changes that we're making in how we work as a department, internally and with our stakeholders and our partners. So today I'm going to walk you through a bit what we're doing. I'm going to start by talking a bit about our role as a department, what the role of Aboriginal housing is in our role. I'm then going to walk you through the 4 key elements of what we're doing to change and get better. And then I'll reflect a bit at the end on why we can only do that in genuine partnership. We cannot do that alone. So in terms of do I have to press something to get these slides working? Is that, yeah, there we go. Magic. In terms of the statistic, it's 82%. So 82% of the tenants that are in the CEO houses across the territory are Aboriginal Territorians. So what does that mean? Well, it means Aboriginal housing isn't a part of what we do as a department. It is what we do as a department. The core of what we do is Aboriginal housing. And that's across remotes, that's across homelands, that's across town camps, that's across regional towns, that's across urban areas. Aboriginal families are at the core of our work, and that has to shape how we work and think as an organisation. Housing, as we all know in this room, is about people first. It provides the foundation for safety, security, stability and aspiration. The buildings are only means to that end. And we know that when housing works, communities are stronger, and we know that when housing fails, the impacts are felt everywhere, across health, across education, across employment, across community well-being. So this is the core responsibility of our department, and our performance and the way we work and think and the people we have on board need to reflect that. And to ensure we deliver on that, we've built a reform agenda that guides how we work and guides how we're going to strengthen the outcomes we work towards with our partners. It's focused on improving delivery and building a more sustainable system, and let me expand on that. We know we're not delivering at the level we need to as a department, and the department's had many names over the years, and I talk about the many names that we've had over the years. But what we do have is a workforce of around 600 people with deep talent, passion, and commitment for the work that we do. The issue here is not intent. The issue is consistency of delivery in what is a challenging space. To address that, Minister Edgington and I have set 4 clear priorities, and Minister Edgington does send his apologies. He is in his electorate in Tennant Creek, but also dealing a lot with issues and stakeholders in Alice Springs today. But we've set 4 clear priorities for our department: strengthening our organisation, public housing reform, empowering the bush, and strategic asset management. And I'll just unpack those a bit because they sound like terribly bureaucratic words on a page rather than anything that will make a difference. But let me talk to you a little bit about how each one of those will make a difference to housing outcomes. So in terms of the first one, strengthening our organisation, everything has to start with a stronger organisation, because no matter how good a policy setting is or a programme is or a budget line is, it's the organisation that has to bring that to life and turn it into outcomes. We're building an organisation that's capable, connected, accountable, and culturally responsive. And that means we've got to strengthen our workforce capability and our capacity. We need to fill a lot of frontline vacancies that need to be filled with people out there on the ground supporting our tenants, particularly our Aboriginal tenants, who are 82% of our tenant base. We need to support those frontline staff. We need to embed culturally responsive practice. We need to improve our governance and systems, and we need to use data and share data to guide better decisions. This won't happen overnight. Organisations take a long time to turn around, but we are building from a position of strength. One of the things I'm proudest about at our department is that we've got by far the highest rates of Aboriginal employment across the NT public sector. So we have 29% of our workforce identifies as Aboriginal, and 15% of our management and leadership team identifies as Aboriginal, and that's more than 3 times the average across the NT public sector. We could do better, we should do better, we will endeavour to do better. We could certainly be more culturally responsive and support our Aboriginal staff more and build our Aboriginal staff base more, particularly our Aboriginal staff base in and from remote communities across the territory. But that is a very solid base to start from, that we have 3 times the employment base for Aboriginal people compared to the rest of the public sector. So that's our 29% staff base. In terms of public housing reform, it's our second priority. This is about resetting the fundamentals: fairness, accountability, safety. At the moment, people would say, many people at least would say, that the system hasn't felt fair. It's not fair for tenants doing the right thing, and the vast majority, more than 90-95% of our tenants do the right thing. Not for neighbours dealing with antisocial behaviour, not for people still wanting a home. And that's why we're strengthening the way the system operates, with clearer accountability for tenants, for the department, and for the system as a whole. At the same time, we're making it easier for tenants to access support, because support and accountability are 2 sides of the same coin of empowerment. The reform makes expectations clearer, and some of them are up there. For tenants, 3 very simple expectations: look after the property, pay the rent, be good neighbours. For us as a department, Dan spoke about some of our responsibilities under the Residential Tenancies Act. They're distilled there, but it's provide support tenants support to help tenants succeed, act quickly and consistently when issues arise, and maintain properties to a safe and habitable standard. In practical terms, this looks like lots of things, but it can look like a tenancy where issues start small, where the tenants are missing some rent payments, having some maintenance concerns, there's some complaints happening in the neighbourhood around them. In the past, we haven't always picked those things up early and dealt with them early and supported tenants to make sure everything's back on track. We are committed to earlier intervention, to clearer follow-up, to quicker support, referrals, and making more consistent decisions before problems become harder to resolve. We're also strengthening our enforcement action where tenants consistently fail to meet their responsibilities and break the rules. But that's done with the due care and compassion and respect that we have for all of our tenants. So we've seen firsthand how that can work, and I'll give you an example, an anonymised example where, and this is one of many examples where we have tenancies that are showing all the signs of failing, that people aren't able to sustain that tenancy and manage all the things that come with sustaining a tenancy. And there's many ways and that can manifest itself in terms of not looking after the house, not paying the rent, not being good neighbours. But in this particular case, after a lot of intensive support and referrals to support, it came a time where some escalated action was required to step in. But that's not about us just taking someone to NTCAT or seeking in an order. It's about having the tough, compassionate conversations to say, hey, this isn't working for you. The support is not working, despite the fact we've given you lots of support and referred it to it. We're going to have to take action, but let's think about what alternatives are for you. And in that case, and in many, many other cases, the tenant voluntarily leaves that tenancy, and we help them find an alternative housing arrangement that works better for them. And in fact, in that particular case, we've heard back from that tenant, because we stay in touch several months later saying, thank you for intervening and giving me a turning point in my life. That intervention has helped me get onto a more solid footing and find a much better housing place for me. Now, I'm not pretending that happens in every case, but more often than not, that's how that plays out. And that's because our people know that they have to act with care and compassion and respect for our tenants through what can be hard processes and hard discussions where a tenancy hasn't been able to be sustained and the rules haven't been able to be followed as a result. Our government's tenant accountability policy statement transparently lays out our approach around this enforcement and talks about strengthening legal settings and rewarding good tenants. The intent we're trying to create here is a system with clear expectations, consistent follow-through, and greater support, because without that, the system doesn't hold. And as I've said, in delivering this reform, our teams will continue to work with great compassion and respect for our tenants, because it's about fairness, accountability, and safety. To talk briefly about our third priority, Empowering the Bush, my colleague Margaret Close will be talking about this in more detail tomorrow for those that want more detail and to have the conversation. But Empowering the Bush is about strengthening community control over decision-making about the services and infrastructure that impact them. Communities in the Territory and across Northern Australia in particular have been clear for a very long time, decisions made without local input are less effective. Self-determination is not an abstract concept, it's a practical need. What does this mean? Well, our Empowering the Bush strategic framework, which this slide is from, has the three objectives you see up there. It's about empowering self-determination, giving communities the authority, support, and confidence to lead their own development. It's about progressing community development, which is in the name of our department, through practical action, improved service coordination, and meaningful progress on community-identified outcomes. And it's about unlocking regional growth, empowering communities to shape, benefit from, and lead the long-term growth of their regions. Where communities want to, and I stress where communities want to, this may involve the de-amalgamation of regional councils and the re-establishment of community councils. But it can also take other forms, depending on what communities' priorities are. Our Empowering the Bush team is out in the Berkeley as we speak, talking to communities on a path they want to take. We've also had expressions of interest from communities and Aboriginal community-controlled organisations across the territory, including many of the organisations represented in the room today, that want to participate in this agenda, either to explore creating a community council or to explore other ways of empowering the bush. And in some cases, that takes the form of completing the implementation of existing local decision-making agreements. For many communities and organisations we hear that housing is a central part of their aspirations for empowering the bush and for self-determination. Whether that's honouring LDM agreements with housing at the centre, which is true for at least 4 organisations in the room today, or establishing a community council with responsibility for housing services, or transitioning housing services to community control, we are listening and we will work with you, and please reach out if you haven't done already, and if you've reached out and you haven't heard back from us, today and tomorrow is a very good time to catch me and remind me that you're waiting for something to happen. This is a long-term structural shift, but it can have immediate practical implications. For example, we've been working with the Canteen Creek Oratila Aboriginal Corporation on their longer-term aspirations, and we identified a quick win to transfer an unoccupied government employee house to them to support employment opportunities in their community. So this was much more than just a property transfer. It's a demonstration of what happens when we listen to and back local leadership, local capability, and local aspirations. That house, which will be transferred in the coming weeks, will create a stable base for local trades pathways so that that community can grow its own capability to maintain its own houses in future. I'll talk about our 4th priority, which is strategic asset management, and that's about how we plan, maintain, and invest in our housing over time. And my department has $4 billion worth of housing assets to its name. So it's important for us. Strategic asset management can, to everybody apart from Michael here, who's in charge of it in my department, to everybody else it can sound very dull and bureaucratic, but it's not. It's actually incredibly important. We know that not getting it right can have tragic consequences. At the core of strategic asset management are 3 things. Firstly, investment to increase and improve our housing stock, including to reduce overcrowding and to increase livability and live up to our requirements under the Residential Tenancies Act. Second, making sure our assets are used as effectively as they can be, including getting the right people into them at the right time in the right place. And third, shifting from reactive to planned and cyclical maintenance, including by having much better data about the condition of our houses. These are all easy things to say, but much harder things to implement across a big, complex, geographically spread system. But we can and we must make progress towards them. And under the Remote Housing Partnership Agreement, the $4 billion that Simon was talking about earlier, the NT and Commonwealth governments are investing $4 billion to address all 3 of these aspects of strategic asset management. Together with our partners in the land councils and AHANT in the Joint Steering Committee, we are making progress. Not as fast as we would all like, but solid progress in partnership, with the transparency, scrutiny, and hard conversations that involves and requires. On another front, in urban areas, in recent months, we've been activating houses that have been vacant for too long, awaiting repairs and maintenance. In Alice Springs alone, we're on track to return 70 houses to service between January and June this year. And that's 70 families from the wait list in a new home in 6 months in Alice Springs. That's what strategic asset management looks like in practice. Let me talk briefly about homelands, because I'm sure many of you want to talk about homelands, and we'll spend the next 2 days talking about homelands. I'm always happy to continue the conversation about homelands. We hear loud and clear the voices of homelands residents asking for more investment. We also hear loud and clear the voices of homeland service providers, many or most of you in the room, asking for more certainty in their contracts. Through the Joint Steering Committee, we are working to present the case for longer-term housing investments, homelands investment to the Commonwealth Government, and I look forward to hearing from you over the next couple of days to further strengthen that case that AHAN has been making very strongly. I'll finish by talking about partnership. having started talking about how Aboriginal housing is the very core of what we do and what we are doing to live up to everyone's expectations about what we do as a department. We have an important role, but we can't deliver outcomes in isolation. Improved outcomes require us all to work together across the Aboriginal housing system. We are genuine in our commitment to a transition to community control and to working through the many complexities that entails. I know we do things that can sometimes frustrate you as individual organisations, as tenants, as a sector. I welcome your feedback and your questions and your complaints, and I need to hear it. Partnership isn't easy, but it is essential. Partnership works best when it's practical, consistent, and focused on outcomes. Different parts of the system coming together bring different strengths, and getting better outcomes requires all those strengths to be aligned. So a plea to continue to work with us in partnership, even when we frustrate you. To wrap up, I want to reaffirm our commitment to working in partnership and invite you to work in genuine partnership with us. And I think a core part of that partnership is the role of Aboriginal Housing NT. Thank you, Leanne and team, for organising this conference and bringing us together, and for the strong and robust partnership we are creating together. We will continue to fund AHANT to perform this role. I'm pleased to say that we'll soon be offering a new 5-year funding agreement. Yeah, I thought that would make you smile, Leanne. With an increase in funding to be negotiated as we move into a new phase of partnership and towards Aboriginal community control. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really look forward to engaging with you all over the next couple of days and the many months and years beyond as we look to improve outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians through housing. Thank you.